Friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are, another episode within the Etihad series, all around care and the 9 priorities that Etihad have just recently launched. Now, my guest today is Leonard Rodrigues, and he's got a good old title. He's Head of Revenue Management and Network Planning. Leonard, it's lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, Chris.
Yeah. Now, before I explain about the care principles, etc., I've got to say, having worked together before, I used to term you lovingly, I say lovingly because it's very positive, as the nutty professor. And that was because, honest to God, I've not come across many people with the intelligence and the natural ability that you have to adjust to certain situations. And yourself, plus the other hat-trick duo, the French gang with Alexis and Cedric, it was probably the most learning period in my career from having such brains around me. And I remember thinking to myself, I've got to get as close as possible to the three of you so some of that intelligence might rub off. But I say lovingly, the nutty professor. So I hope people will start printing T-shirts up now for you when they hear this.
Generally.
Yeah, the kids as well. No, but seriously, now, so the subject matter is all about care. And we decided to do that coming out of COVID and seeing how people and individuals proved not only during COVID, but afterwards, how important it is to care about the various elements. And those elements are, as an individual or a company, daring to care, then caring about the people, caring about the customers, caring about the business, caring about the tomorrows, which some people don't do enough of, and ultimately caring about the results. So I know that also fits closely with things that you like and hold dear. So of those, which ones are the closest for you?
Well, I'm assuming my boss is going to watch that podcast, so I'm going to have to say results first. But to be honest, the ones that we're really, really passionate in Etihad about is the people and the tomorrow, because we really feel that's the most important thing is really to carve, what is the tomorrow's Etihad.
No, exactly. Now, I also know, and as rumor spreads and people make references, but during the COVID time, the move from when you first joined and then a few months later, such a COVID experience, it must have been terrible for you and the family, coming over here and then thinking, my good God, what's going to happen now? But the way you responded and the way you adjusted, which is what I'm saying, is when people can adjust to situations, whether it's excessively positive or excessively negative, that's the value of having people in your team who can do that. And I also remember Cedric very fondly for some of the things that he did as well. But how does that work in your mind? Because that's where the professor label comes from, because I just found it incredible how quickly you were able to adjust to the realities of the situation and how to overcome them.
Well, yeah, I'll be honest. There is an amount of replay that has happened to me a little bit because so I've been working for different companies before that, and in both companies, which are Air France, KLM, Martinair, and in Qatar Airways after that, we had a couple of cases where things like this happened. So when I was in Europe, we had the volcano, and we also had some sort of unfortunate, very unfortunate and quite tragic situation in Japan, to which France needed to respond. And so that created, a type of rush that we've never really seen before. And then when I was later in Qatar, there was a moment in time when the border suddenly closed and the food was unavailable. And, we did a lot of things, including building the biggest cow farm, probably for sure in the region, I'm not sure in the world, but and having those 7,000 cows being flown from Los Angeles on cargo aircraft. So so there are elements of crisis management that I was already familiar with. So that always this experience comes in handy. And then I think the thing is I really enjoy working with people. So then. When I see stress mounting, I've got a natural reaction to think, okay, let's slow down for a minute because everybody's in stress, I tend to find that actually when the stress mounts, it creates more occasions for you to be focused, and to look for a solution. So you hear a lot of things, and I remember hearing just before the lockdown, I remember hearing from somebody who's in maintenance. The guy was saying, is there any business case financially to use passenger aircraft to fly cargo? Yeah. And because it was before the lockdown, the answer was no. I mean, the yields had not really moved into that direction. But I remember thinking, no, that's never going to happen. But how bad would it look like? And so we started working on a financial model with the network planning on passenger side to try to answer, because they knew everything about those aircraft, and I tend to work mostly on the cost planning part with freighters. So it was kind of an interesting exercise to build some sort of a calculator. And it was useless because the yield input wouldn't make it financially viable. But then, we started building up the model and, we were refreshing it. And then, one day, you start hearing, the projection is this. And then you're like, then it works. Yeah, so then suddenly, the lockdown happened on a certain day. And 24 hours later, we had mini freighters starting to fly because we were ready. We had prepared for it. And just because, I didn't get the initial idea, but somebody pitched it, and I thought,
why not take it and run with it?
Yeah, why not? Yeah. It might work one day. Yeah. And then it did work. And I think a lot of people didn't believe it, but it worked for quite some time.
Yeah. But isn't it amazing, in my mind anyhow, that the amount of people who don't look at business continuity, contingency, worst case scenarios, and I think the one thing that COVID has given as a lesson to everybody, you need to be aware of those things now. And the better prepared you are, the more successful you'll be. God forbid something goes wrong.
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree. I think there's an element of how much can you deal with, because I think a lot of people, and it's not really negative. It's just the reality. I think a lot of people in their jobs are giving them their 100%. So, they're constantly juggling their private life, their professional life. And then suddenly you tell them, can you spare some time to think about what if scenarios, and what if Godzilla comes in and they're like, oh, come on, man, I've got enough on my plate. And so I think what you say is correct, but it is difficult to impose the discipline to have a lot of business continuity planning, because everybody looks at it like, come on, realistically, when is this going to happen? Yeah. And then it happens. Yeah. And then you're like, well, it's good that we were prepared.
Exactly. And I think the world's learning, whatever you think might not happen, it will eventually.
Exactly.
Now, the other thing that I learned working with you was the importance that you focus, and everybody should actually, on data-driven decision-making. Mm. The more information you've got and the more accurate that information is, the easier it is sometimes to make what would be seen as a straightforward opportunity or change or decision, but without that data, it would be very complex.
No, yes, you're very correct. There is an element of tradition, I think, in air cargo, which is not there anymore. Let's be honest. But as far as the 90s went, and maybe the early 2000s, the passenger, people were not that interested in what was happening on the cargo side. Yeah. And because of that, the cargo side had to manage with their own tools, whatever, was given to them. Yeah. And so because it's a niche, because it's smaller as an industry than the air travel, those tools were not, so many of them. And so what has happened indeed is there's a bit of a culture of, let's say, common sense, like in traditional air cargo. But then when people realize that, common sense can lead to major losses or in the COVID cases, major profits, suddenly people are like, oh, you know what, we should look at data more in detail and more granular. So you're very correct. Initially, when I moved into cargo in Air France KLM, I came from the passenger side. I came there for this exact reason. They were in a process of trying to restructure, let's say, the cargo business to make it more profitable. So the idea was not to change what cargo is, but to try to really look into it in a way that would ensure, that whatever losses were made were sustainable.
Yep.
And so I came in with that culture of trying to bring, numbers, analysis, in the air cargo environment, and to this date, I still find it extremely helpful. Yeah. What I think I in Etihad, what we really have is and that's because we have a team which works for me on analytics. What we've been able to do is really produce analytics that the commercial teams and the operations teams are interested in.
Yes.
Because the risk of this data, driven decision making is that it's only a boardroom, decision making where smart people are looking at pie charts and they're like,
and then they
let's
tell
do
people
this.
what to do.
And then everybody says this is stupid, like everybody in the field. And so we are very focused in Etihad, and I've been very focused as an individual to make sure that I don't develop anything that nobody understands. So it's always analytics that I can give back to somebody who's facing a customer or having a shipment to manage. And so we've spent a lot of development on this, and it's pretty cool what we have in Etihad.
And it's also important if you take that approach, because then you're giving somebody a tool and they understand why. But it's when it's the other way and it's all confusing and people say, "Oh my God, here they go again with this volumes of spreadsheets." But don't you think that's something that people should be a lot better at? So instead of just putting sheets and charts up, just explain what it means and why it's so important to them in that particular role.
Yeah. I mean, ideally correct. I mean, that's what you would want. I do believe that it's not that you've got good people on one side and bad people on the other side. It's more time management and priorities. Like they'll want a 30-minute digest on how the cargo performance is moving, and then summarizing cargo in 30 minutes is like an impossible task. So then you need to go into a certain level of summarization of KPIs. And most of those KPIs mean nothing to people in the field.
Yes.
And so then you basically need to create like a balanced scorecard to transition the KPIs that mean something to the boardroom to the indicators that mean something to the people, let's say in the field, in the teams. And so that's what we are doing. We're making sure that whatever transit from left to right, we try to act as, maybe it's a bit too high as a word, but like a Rosetta Stone, It's like we're constantly taking things from one side to the other and showing it, in a way that people understand it.
Yeah. On a practical note now, and with that in mind, right? So you got everybody says 20,000 feet. I want it on one slide. I want half a page. I want to know in 5 minutes. And then you've got the people who are struggling to try and get their positions put across. Do you think now also is the time to adopt a different approach whereby managers actually spend a little bit more time with feet on the ground? Because some of the training now, the LMS training, and I've been talking to your colleagues about moving from a memory test whereby you attend somewhere for a period of time, you're tested on what you remember, instead of retention of knowledge and competency.
Yeah.
So do you think now is the time to get a bit more balance with senior managers to understand what's making an impact on the ground and how that impact can actually, lift the business up?
Yeah, for sure. I don't have the answer. Maybe because I'm not the specialist, maybe because there is no answer. I don't know. I don't have the answer to know what the perfect mix is. But it is clear that you take somebody who's doing so Power BI, like EDH data lakes, like the whole day. You show them what a warehouse looks like or what a freighter looks like, their work improves. So the reality is what you're describing is real. What's the optimum? I'm not too sure yet, because some people are like visual learners, some people need different types of platforms. Yeah. I don't think we have found the ideal solution, but yeah, clearly this cross-functional approach, seeing things, understanding things, talking to people is very important.
Yeah. And just recently, I've been doing a project now with resource planning, and when people throw all the figures in, they throw figures in, but they don't know whether or not, let's just say, transport from stand to cargo warehouse. It can be anything, as you know, a couple of kilometres even. So that influence has an influence on the KPIs or the CPIs or whatever, and then people who are doing the data aren't aware of that.
Yeah.
And then you've got other areas that they're not aware of the complexities of the process because of the infrastructure that's there and other legacy issues. Yeah. So the mathematical equation could actually be destructive if it was put into place, because they wouldn't have that appreciation. Yeah. So that balance now, I think that's something that.
You're fully right. You're fully right. What you describe is, I mean, the resource planning, I've seen people develop models of resource planning, and so I'm trying to be empathetic to the guy that, has been tasked with the resource planning. The main reason he's been asked to create a model is because there's somebody who wants to make sure that the number of people we're recruiting is, not too many. We're not going to have some slack, it's just the right. And then there's also not going to be a meltdown, in the warehouse. So like the mandate is really to reconcile whatever number somebody says is the right number with some sort of numbers. And so that creates so many requirements that, this column has to foot like this, that they spend a huge amount of time making sure that the model looks realistic, right? But they look realistic from a numbers perspective.
Correct.
And then, like if you tell them, did you check that? Like, oh, come on, man. Like, I've already been spending so many hours making it somehow work properly, and now you're telling me that I'm missing like XYZ factor, but it does happen.
And that's why now I think, and something that you impressed me with when I was working with you, is having that foresight and calmness to look at the overall picture. Because now, when you've got things like that, if an organisation now starts to validate it from a practical perspective and verify it from the actual impact on the business, then you've got a match made, I was going to say in heaven, but a match made wherever, for success. And that's the important thing.
You're right. I mean, one such example, which, helps me bring it back a little bit to tomorrow, so we've been working on this, POC with Speed Cargo. And that's completely driven by an operations sponsorship. So they really push the project because they see all the benefits that they would have to have like a better build up, more professional load plans, understanding what the dimensions of the shipments whenever there's an offload. So they know what the advantage is for them, and then like they really did the POC. They did extremely well. But then at some point, like after you've done the POC, somebody needs to pay the bills. And that's where, like when you're well integrated, which at Etihad really is the case, I mean, we're all on the same floor. We just walk from one to another, is like we've got that really ease of saying, okay, so what do you have now? How do I make money out of this? Okay, now I just need one more layer, which does something, an algorithm somewhere, and then I should be able to generate that amount of money with all this data that you've created. And essentially, like if you're not there, then like they're gonna have to go with some numbers saying, I think we're going to prevent some revenue leakage, and then you go down the drain of something that's been tried and tested, and we know all the negative reactions you get. But there's actually a real good way, without any sort of revenue leakage kind of conversation, to generate money out of additional data. What they're doing is producing additional data, and then you're like, okay, how do I monetize it? And there's a way. So then let's monetize it.
Which is the secret of success. Now, with that in mind, and we mentioned earlier on about experts give out their reports annually, and they give forecasts what's going to happen. I mean, everything was going crazy. Now the rates are dropping. I mean, they're dropping quickly, and there's probably a bit more drop to come as well. Now, with that in mind, and also with part of your responsibilities being the network development, etc., how's that now playing out with the new levels of data that's coming in?
Well, so I want to say, to preface that, without even the new levels of data, I think we are very lucky in Etihad that we've dedicated some resources to analytics. So we've got, a forecast mechanism that has been, trial, dusted, and vetted by even, like external parties. So the way we forecast the future, of course, it's not a crystal ball. It doesn't tell you, exactly, what you need.
Correct.
But the good thing is we do gain a lot of time, at least in board level conversations. There's an understanding that we know what's going to happen. And so that cuts a lot of, let's say, unnecessary conversations. Because of course it's important to have a number, but like you are more focused on the negotiation and making sure that you're using all the information to do the negotiation the best, not the discussion on the forecast. So we have all the technologies in place to really limit the amount of time that we spend on forecast. It's done, it's proper, last year was less than 1% accurate, so that's pretty good.
That's very good.
But then we spend a lot of time, indeed, trying to get all the the relevant data. So on top of World ACD, now you've got the inclusion of Selfie with Clive, now called Xeneta, because they've sold to like this company that sells data, including sea trade.
Right.
And then you've got the TAC index with Payton. And so this is also additional data that gives you ticks on contract values. And so we've got all of this, and then we use everything. And on the data that is granular enough, we actually run a lot of what-if scenarios so that it really produces the whole picture at every negotiation for the sales to understand.
Yeah.
So just before I came here, we were discussing like the summer contracts out of Asia. And so we were able to produce these really extremely comprehensive sheets that we can review with the sales. They have everything. They understand like what's happened last week, or so what you say is correct, right? The pressure, there's tremendous pressure, but within the pressure, there's always some indicators of pluses, right?
Yeah.
And finding those pluses is really what's kind of interesting. So like last week, there was a sudden slight shortage in capacity, like Transpac out of Hong Kong. Yeah. So suddenly, like you're trying to move the conversation and say, well, but what's your US capacity looking like? And then suddenly the guys are like, oh yeah, actually we would welcome some of it. And so if you get all the data bits, then it really enhances your conversation. Of course, we want to believe that, and it's true that our profit increases from those conversations. But it's also important that our sales teams, when they have conversation with customers, that they really show the brand, the professionalism.
Yeah.
And that's what really we want. We want to make sure that, like when they see a salesperson wherever in the world from Etihad, well, first of all, we are close, we are accessible, we're easy to do business with, right? That's the partner choice mantra we have. But we want them to be like, these guys have all their data, they really know their thing.
And it is impressive though, isn't it? When somebody turns up and you're having a discussion and everything, and I mean, even when you're being taught, little tricks of the trade and everything, and somebody asks you a question and you've got some data or you've got a little toolkit or a booklet in front of you, not necessarily the computer or your phone. Sometimes it looks more impressive to have a nice phone. And you say, just 1 second, and then you go through it and you say, yeah, that's exactly right. But we think the parties that are involved in a meeting, they're very impressed because they see that you've got an effective toolkit.
Yeah, and if you go, like, the examples of things that we're heading towards, that it's still requiring a bit of a manual manpower, I would say, but I really hope that we can have it fully automated, is, when you go and meet a Japanese forwarder, knowing which airway bills are currently live in the system and might not hit their DAP.
Yes.
Their milestones, and you'll be like, hey, at the moment, of course, these 7 airway bills, like, we think there might be a slight delay on, the fourth milestone. If you can do that in meeting with these kinds of forwarders that are really, really looking into the quality, you get additional business right away. It's not even a rate conversation. It's just like, oh, if we do business with those guys, our shipments will arrive on time.
Yeah, exactly. And that adds to their percentile from the mix that they obviously get involved in, which is brilliant. Now, we're talking about digitization, we're talking about enhancements, we're talking about toolkits. One of the things that I think has really sped things up is the online booking now. Carriers being confident enough to give that amount of capacity to be openly booked on a system. Now, if you take the way it's developed and you take the key players that are there, obviously you're utilising all of them, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Plus your own portal.
Correct.
Now, a man of your intellect, right? And if you were to just spread it, right? Look what you could do with that.
Yeah.
It could. I mean, you've got certain limitations at the moment, but those limitations could get a lot wider as things go on. Do you think there's any possibility in that moving forward?
Yeah, a lot of people are open to co-development. Yeah. When they talk to you, and you have your monthly catch-up, and then you ask one good question, and if you go, and then you ask 2 good questions, the month afterwards. Then there is this appetite.
The momentum starts to build.
Yeah, because they can see what's in them for themselves. They're like, ooh, that would add a lot of value to my features. Yeah. But then you get free, IT development also from your side.
Exactly.
Because that's the difficulty. The difficulty in air cargo is, again, like, because of the size of it. Getting a huge amount of people interested in doing IT development, it's just not going to happen. So you really need to use every opportunity that you can to do co-development. And then our position is, if it serves the customer, we'll do it and you can keep the IP.
Yep.
That's our view. And so we are engaged in quite a bit of those. And hopefully a lot of them will lead to, some sort of marketing announcement that, makes it look good. But we're definitely working on those lines.
Yeah, and that's the way to do it, because together, and also using people that need your services as well, it's to everybody's advantage.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what those portals are raising in terms of capital, how many data scientists they have on payroll, it would nearly be criminal not to use them, right?
Although some of them are now starting to reduce their headcount, which is sad.
Oh, for sure.
But again, anybody who's got any foresight in that side of things, it was eventually going to happen.
Yes.
Which is a shame. Now, big golden question for the professor, right? If you were able to construct, a new let's say set of binoculars or a window into the future, right? But a realistic future.
Yeah.
What would you see as being some of the biggest innovations or technology developments that are capable of happening but are urgently required over the next, let's say, 5 years?
I think, let's say, visualization or dimension has reached the point where it is cheap enough to implement that it's going to become efficient.
Yeah.
So just to surf on your professor nickname, and for the people that might be young and listening to the podcast, air cargo is not that old as an industry, but then it used to be a price per kilo, and then at some point presumably Ford started approaching airlines saying, hey guys, don't you think we should do something with volume, and the chargeable weight was created. These are just and
the console.
Yeah, they're making the money from the console, of course. That's the gateway concept and the console concept. But the key thing is, like, when you look at it from just a numbers perspective, it's just one number and then two numbers that create a third number, and that's it. And when you look at a shipment, a complex shipment, and all the milestones it needs to hit, you're looking at it and you think it can't just be just 2 or 3 numbers. It has to be a bit more than that. And the reason it's not been developed is, like, we've not been, as for the chargeable weight, been able to allocate a direct value to, knowing the dimension. And that's why we are still, looking at cargo. And then we talk to the passenger colleagues. I don't think they even understand that wide bodies have positions. They just think we push as many brown boxes as there are, into the plane. So I think that's really the next step, to be able to, when you sell, a lower deck, stop always profiling it to 10 cubes, and allow yourself to profile it to 12 or maybe to 14 if somehow the shipment size allow you to build wings. And if your handling agent for whatever reason has no real experience with wings, then the system should tell him, you just need like a couple spaces, and then you start building the diagonal after
after a certain height,
after a certain height. So I think those systems, they're becoming accessible. I really hope that in the next year or 2 maximum, like, we've got a way to, let's say, solve the Tetris life. That's going to be fun.
Yes. Now, it is a simple business. But we within the business make it quite complex an awful lot of the times. And if we just tried to, and it's easy to make something hard, but it's hard to make something easy. And if we started to do things differently, and if the whole supply chain started to come together, and everybody talks about collaboration and data sharing, but lots of people they don't care to share as much as they say they would do. Now, if everybody started to come together and it was like a help us to help you principle, we could make the whole process so much more efficient. So you look at congestion, you look at infrastructure limitations, you look at all the things that people are aware of in their own domestic markets. But if we did things differently and were a lot more transparent, whether it's community systems or whether it's in-house bolt-ons, whatever it is, that would surely now be the way to go forward. And do you not think that airports have got a huge positive disruption element if they decided to look after their particular ecosystem?
You've said so many things that at the end of yes to the final one on the airports and the ecosystem. But I think if you roll back, like the simple making it complex, it is simple. You're right, but it's simple and not profitable.
Yes.
So then, when it's not profitable, you need to add all those layers to try to make it sustainable.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. The business concept is simple, but until such a time that the profit margins of everybody is going to be assured, which has traditionally not been the case at all.
It's like a baton being passed from one to the other.
Exactly, and you'll have all these priorities and all those initiatives and all those complexities added to try to make it. And as long as everybody in every organization gets all these layers of complexity up to the point that their brain goes ballistic because they're overloaded with work and things like this, then they don't really have the time to collaborate. It's not that they don't want. It's like, yeah, sure, but can you do it? If you do everything for me, then okay, I look into that. Definitely, because of the size of the industry, we need to be able to add everybody together, 1 + 1 = 3 kind of concept, in order to have the economies of scale that are required to solve all the small deficiencies, all the small irritations we have. Yeah, I totally agree. And yes, the airport have a role to play, and it is one of, I'm not an airport person, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but they also face a similar problem, which is it's very simple for an airport to understand what the value of passengers are because of the way the fees are structured.
Numbers, volumes,
exactly.
Times.
Exactly. You've got the passenger taxes. How much they spend on the duty free. It's all it's mechanical. You've got your table. That's a profitable business. If you ever get a chance in one key airport, they tell you, hey Chris, you can open your coffee shop in this airport. You should take it. It's a really good business, and so that's clear. And then in the air cargo side, what are you going to do, right? How do you make your money? Yeah, sure, you're generating employment and it's good for the economy and everything, but if you're the marketing guy or the cargo VP, how do you go to your boss and you say, hey, look how much money I've saved or how much money I've made? It's not as direct, and potentially is the reason why some airports are better at it than others, because some have really focused on it, and some should focus more on it.
Yeah, because if they realise they can influence their community, and at the end of the day, COVID shows an airline will fly in and will fly out, but airports stay. And the tenants on an airport have to stay as well.
Correct. So
by getting that together, even if it's just releasing some congestion, better infrastructure, solar paneling, self-sufficiency, sustainability, all those points, it adds to why an airline or why a business would choose to go to that airport as opposed to another.
Yeah, completely. But you're right. It's not the line. Like if I go back to my early days, I remember you're in Air France KLM, you're on the French side, you're French, and then you're being told that the Netherlands is a bigger cargo market. There's bigger cargo demand. It's more logistics driven, and to a certain extent it's true. But these days, the investment that you have on the platform tends to actually be bigger, in new technologies in Paris than it is in Amsterdam. And sometimes you wonder why, it's Amsterdam, it's really the hub that everybody's always been driving towards. And sometimes it feels like they really want to, become passenger only. So I think there is a need for realization, of the airports, what role they need to play and they want to play in that whole system.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Then it's been an absolute pleasure. It reminds me of Back to the Future, and it's always interesting talking to you. You've got such a wealth of vision and ideas. It's even fun talking to you, so I've enjoyed it. I loved our time that we were working together, and I think Etihad's very lucky to have you.
Thank you very much, and that was great.
Yeah, good luck, mate.